Hello, good morning, everybody, and welcome on a nice Sunday morning to the Bangalore International Center. It's very nice of you to take the Sunday morning off and come here to hear me speak on a subject that is a niche subject, not commonly addressed by many authors or books. And probably 18th century has been a subject of my interest. But before we deal with the book proper, we have to go to the backstory and see what happened before, especially for the people who are uninitiated about what happened in the 17th and the 18th century until this story starts, which is in the year 1772. So I will lead you to exploring the subject a little more and then a little more until finally you have read all the books I have written. I'm not what is often referred to as a learned historian, as a student of history or a professor of history. Academic tones on history have been written, but what I find is they are written for other historians to read. Very rarely they are written for the lay person, and therefore, as a lay person, I probably could understand what a lay person who is a reader wants, and therefore, when I began writing it, I started writing it from that point of view, explaining the nitty-gritty of it, what happened, why it happened, where it happened, and so on. So, and I also feel there are so many types of history today, but narrative history is the bedrock on which all other histories, whether it's social history, economic history, cultural history, all these stand on the bedrock of narrative history. So I think narrative history is important, it keeps people interested. It reminds people that history is not the dry subject you learnt in schools, but it's a story, and it has to be told in the form of a story. So which is what I try to do. Second advantage I have when I write about history is that as a doctor and as a surgeon, I've been kind of trained or used to being dispassionate. So when I break bad news to the patient, I don't get involved and I don't start feeling bad about it myself, or I don't start feeling good about it myself. But, and that is what is required when you tackle a subject, an emotive subject like history. You have to keep it at hand's length. And you have to deal with it, because immediately you start getting too close to your subject. You start choosing what you want to write, deleting what you don't want to write. And of course, you can always gloss over certain things. But eventually that dispassionate attitude when you write a book is very important, especially in a subject like history. So why write about the 18th century? I mean, what's so special about the 18th century? For one, what we are in the 20th and 21st century, we owe a lot of it to what happened in the 18th century, because very proximate, before the British rule started, what was India? That you come to know when you read about the second half of the 17th century and the 18th century. And then we changed later on in the colonial period. And then we changed again after 1947. So this is the closest we have to know what happened before the British came. That's the importance of 18th century. Secondly, the 18th century has been largely ignored and is largely misunderstood, or it's a kind of there's an 18th century debate, let's say, which is going on, what is the meaning of 18th century? What was it all about? And so there are many questions about it, about this whole period, and how did matters evolve, I would say, from the year 1646 roughly, or the middle of the 17th century. And of course, we all know about Chhatrapati Shivaji, his sons Chhatrapati Sambhaji and Rajaram. We know of the mercurial generals who were there at that time, Santaji Ghorpade, the steady Dhanaji Madhav Rao, Hukumat Pana Ramchandra Pant Amatya. And we know something of Bajirao, though not all of it was accurate in the movie. But who are Peshwa Nana Sahib, for example, or Sadoba, or Raghoba, and Madhav Rao? Who were the Gardis? And where does that important Panipat 1761 stand in our historiography, which is often not even mentioned in our textbooks? And how did the decade after Panipat progress? What happened? What was the India of 1772? The year is where this book starts, 1772. And the death of Madhav Rao Peshwa took place that year. So as you can see, there's a lot here, and I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. So here goes. So what does one, as I said, what does one make of the 18th century? This is what India was in the 18th century like, and it remains a crucial link in our history. And was it a Mughal century? Was it a British or a French or a Portuguese century? What did this period of mid 17th century to 18th century really stand for? And actually, when you go through the documents of those times, the original documents, most of them being in Marathi, and of course there are Persian sources, there are Rajasthani sources, there are English sources, there are French sources, there are Portuguese sources. So you have to bring them all together to come up with a unified narrative. And when you go through all these, you come to the conclusion that it was after all that a Maratha century. And therefore, another thing I would like to say is that you cannot really understand the history of 18th century India unless you read the Maratha history, because at that point in time, if you see in this map, and you can see all the years mentioned here, the Marathas in Punjab in 17, for example, 58, 59. Then they were in Delhi several times. 1719 they changed emperor. 1737 Bajirao went there. 1752 to 55 they were there. 57 to 61 they were there. 70 to 73 they were there. And when I say they were there, they were controlling the city and the emperor. 1783 to 88, then again 1789 to 1803, when it was finally handed over from the Marathas to the British. It was not, Delhi was not a city taken over from the Mughals, it was taken over from the Marathas. The Scindias were holding that city at that point in time. You come down to Bundelkhand, Malwa, which is most of Madhya Pradesh today, you find from 1729-30 to 1818. Those provinces were under Maratha control. Gujarat was almost for a century, 1720 to 1818. The rest of Maharashtra, west of, say, Aurangabad, 1674 to 1818, was again under Maratha rule. Upper Karnataka, right, and sometimes up to Srirangapatnam and Bangalore, you find Bangalore was the Jagir of Shahaji Raje, the father of Chhatrapati Shivaji, and for a good 40 years in the 17th century. 1638 he came here, and his son was also here, and from here he went to Tanjavur, established his rule there, and then I think Bangalore was sold in the 1680s. In the Carnatic, Trichinapalli, Arcot, all those areas from the time that Chhatrapati Shivaji first came down to the Deccan, to the Carnatic region, right up to the 1760s, you find that the Maratha presence was there. So practically the whole of India in the 18th century, if you want to read the history of all these places, you cannot do without learning the history of the Marathas. And that is why the 18th century, I call it the Maratha century. So we'll take it from here in phases, because it went on in phases, one after the other. And the first phase, I would say, is the period 1646 to 1680, which is the phase when Chhatrapati Shivaji laid the foundation of this kingdom. And from 1642, you find Shivaji, who was the son of Shahaji Raje, who was the Jagirdar of Bangalore at that time. He comes to Pune to look after the Jagir of Pune. Now, Pune is very uniquely located because in 1635 or 36, you find the Mughals had taken over Ahmednagar. And their southern border was through the districts of Ahmednagar. And the northern borders of the Bahmani kingdoms, which were ruling in the south at that time, were just south of, or included actually Pune also. That is where the Bahmani Sultan of Bijapur had given that Jagir to Shahaji. So Pune was uniquely located between two giant pas. And when Shivaji with his mother and a few attendants were sent to Pune to look after that Jagir of his father, in 1642, he started his enterprise. He was 12 years old at that time. And as a 16-year-old, you find he makes his first seal. I think all royalty that time had to have a seal of some kind. And you find that he makes a seal over here, which says, and which is translated, you can see it down there, ever growing in splendor, like the moon of the first day in the bright half of the month. And adored by the world, this seal of Shivaji, the son of Shahaji, shines for the benediction of all. And the seal is in Sanskrit, which was unusual at that time because his parents had their seals in Persian. So it shows the tendency, or I would say what he was tending towards. Because later in life he established what is called the Rajya Vyavahar Kosh. And the Rajya Vyavahar Kosh was specifically commissioned to weed out Persian words which had crept into the Marathi language. So you find that the Ashtapradhan, or his 8 ministers of his cabinet, earlier had Persian names, he changed them all into Sanskrit names. Like the Peshwa was the prime minister, was made into the Pandit Pradhan. The Dabir was a foreign minister, he was called a Sumant. So in this manner, all these 8 names were converted into Indian names. So that was one of the things that he did. And his aim was very simple, that he wanted to have a Swarajya. So as I very often say, and many of you who have seen my speeches and talks will see that I keep saying that Swarajya was mentioned in Indian history just twice. One was when Shivaji started his enterprise of self-rule, and the second when Lokmanya Tilak fought against the British. And both times we were under some kind of colonial imposition, some kind of alien rule, I would say. Because alien rule is basically defined by the jurisprudence, the state religion, the state language, the court language, the system of promotions that were there in the kingdom at that time. There's a book written by Professor Athar Ali of Aligarh Muslim University who discusses the mansabs from Akbar to Aurangzeb's time. And you find that 70 to 80% of those highest mansabs were reserved for people with Turco-Persian ancestry. So that gives a clue of if you wanted to be promoted, you had to be a certain kind of person. And this was discrimination against the indigenous people. So this is what he was revolting against. I'm not going into the religious aspects of what was happening in that period because everybody practically is aware of that. And he made a beginning at that time of undoing those changes. And most of all, I would say, he cared for his people. And some of the main important things that it is, one is he abolished slavery in his kingdom. He formed a centralized government which paid salary directly to all the people. He abolished the Jagirdars because the Jagirdars would be completely responsible for collecting the taxes, and the people didn't give the taxes. There have been instances when their family was sold off as slaves. So here the central government removed the Jagirdar and put their own men to collect the land revenue. There was a discriminatory land revenue which was again done away with for him, and he wanted to treat all his subjects in an equitable manner without discrimination of any kind and without any kind of what is called a zulum. In Marathi there is a word ki Moglai aayeka, which means that is this, when anybody does some injustice to you, is this Moglai? Even today that phrase is still prevalent. So this was the purpose behind his entire enterprise of Swaraj. Now the first, almost till 1656, till the age of 26, you find that the entire enterprise was restricted to the Jagir at Pune and a few other parganas at that time. And the first move came in 1656, 1657. And that happened because Muhammad Adil Shah, the Sultan of Bijapur, died. And the very next year, Shah Jahan in Delhi fell ill. And Aurangzeb, who was the viceroy here, he left the Deccan to go and fight the battle of succession. And there was a power vacuum in the Deccan, and which is the time when you find that the Marathas under Shivaji crossed the Western Ghats and went into the Konkan area and captured the districts of Kalyan, Bhivandi and so on. And that is the time when the kingdom actually reached the Arabian Sea. And it is even today, I think, a visionary act that a king of that time, who is land-based all his life, he comes to the districts of Kalyan, Bhivandi and thinks that he must establish a navy. Very few instances of this are available in Indian history. And he established a navy. In the beginning, the know-how was not available. So he engaged a Portuguese father and son called Vaigas. Surname was Vaigas. And the first 20 ships were built under their guidance. After which the Portuguese told them to withdraw and stop giving assistance. And by that time, I would say that they had already learned how to do the job. And the remaining ships were built from there onwards. So this was a very, so that's why in the Ajna Patra, which was written in the 18th century, this phrase which you find, which is written on the top, like the cavalry rules the earth, the one with an armada rules the oceans. So that, because the Portuguese were demanding a cartes or a passport to ply the Indian seas, they said that we are the lords of the seas all over the world, and if you want to ply the sea here, you have to take our cartes, our permission. You have to pay some money for it and take permission for that. The English had first refused to do it, and now the Marathas refused to do it. Very often you find in English texts Maratha admirals of the Maratha fleet being labeled as pirates. Now, a definition in international legal terms, what is the definition of a pirate? A pirate is one who fights and robs other ships on his own account. But when he's appointed as the admiral of the fleet by a recognized king, he's no longer a pirate. He's defending his territory, his domains. And that was something which the English did not accept. And because the English did not take the cartes or the passport from the Marathas, they continued raiding their ships. So this move of 1756 was followed by building a string of sea forts. You find all along the western coast of Maharashtra, right from Sindhudurg, north of Goa, to right up to, Arnala Island and Vasai and these places. You find a string of sea forts which were built at that time. And as an aside, I'd like to mention, because recently there's a big controversy about the raid on Surat. And in 1664, when Shivaji actually attacked Surat and he took a lot of loot from there, there's an English letter which says that he said to the Mughals that you have attacked my territory and my people, and you have waged war on me, forcing me to maintain an army, fight back and defend them. And therefore, I will make you pay for that war. And that was the way he took the money from Surat. And that money was not used for building ostentatious palaces. It was used to build all this Sindhu Durg and so on. All these forts which were built out of the Rajgarh, his capital, the first capital. It was built with the money obtained from Surat. So this first attack on Surat actually antedates all these later construction which he did at that time. And finally, he realized that there are a lot of intervening stories which I'm skipping over, like the attack on Shaiste Khan in Pune, his visit to Agra, and when he came back from there, it was felt that if he has to rise above an ordinary zamindar, which is how the Mughals looked upon him and everybody else, the English looked upon him, he has to have a coronation as a king. So in June 1674, in his capital, the fort of Raigad, he had a grand coronation and declared himself king. And the signs of kingship which he held at that time was he held a chhatra over his head, or the royal parasol as it was called, which signified that he is the protector of his people. He minted coins, the golden horns of Chhatrapati Shivaji, which you can see in various books of coins, and they're still being auctioned all over. And the third thing was he established a shaka, or his own year, like you have a Vikram Samvat and that kind of thing. So we had a Shiva Rajyabhishek Shaka. So the day of his coronation was the day when the Rajyabhishek Shaka was started. And last year in Maharashtra they celebrated the 350th Rajyabhishek Shaka, which was the 350th year of his coronation. So this was a signal event. It was a declaration that there is a king who has now been coronated by whatever methods were prevalent at that time, by calling the Shastris and all these. The English envoy from Bombay came and attended that. He's left vivid descriptions of how the ceremony went and so on. But this was a very important political event, the coronation, which was a declaration of independence and sovereignty at that time. And soon after this coronation, he went on an expedition down south. And he reached the river Kaveri, because across the Kaveri was Tanjavur, which was his cousin's kingdom. So you find he captures Vellore, he captures Jinji, and all the regions around there, where he establishes his own men who continue ruling in that place up till the year 1698. So when you find that Chhatrapati Shivaji, as he's called after his coronation, finally died in 1680. He was aged only 50 at that time. But when he died, his son, his elder son, Chhatrapati Sambhaji, took over as the next Chhatrapati. And in 1681, there was an event in North India which affected the future course of events in the south. Aurangzeb was on the campaign against the state of Jodhpur, because Maharaja Jaswant Singh of Jodhpur had passed away, and Aurangzeb had decided he will confiscate his state from the Jodhpur Diwan at that time was a man called Durga Das. And Durga Das decided to fight for the infant son of Jaswant Singh and his rights. And in this battle, Aurangzeb's son, who was also named Akbar, defected and came over to the Jodhpur army. And Aurangzeb was in a trap that he was in a very smaller army than the Jodhpur army. With Akbar going that side, he was in trouble. So he used a subterfuge. He wrote letters to both of them saying that at the time of battle we will defect and not fight. And this created some kind of mistrust between the allies, and they lost the battle. And then Durgadas told Akbar, Prince Akbar, that if you have to be safe from your father, there's only one king who can protect you, and that is you go to Chhatrapati Sambhaji. So Akbar, when he fled Jodhpur and came down in 1682 to Sambhaji, it was obligatory for Aurangzeb to follow him, because in the Mughal annals you cannot leave a contender for the throne. Once he has made a bid for the throne, he has to be defeated, exterminated, whatever it is. So he came chasing down, and from the time he was the viceroy here, it was always his ambition to do away with the kingdoms of Bijapur and Golconda. He even called them blasphemous, actually, that they did not follow the true religion and so on. So that was always an aim. And of course, the Marathas were a second aim that he wanted to. So he came down in 1682, and for the next 25 years, you find the entire region, the entire Deccan was aflame. It was ravaged completely, agriculture, economy, the people's lives. It was all, it was a massive war across the country. In 1685, 1687, you find the kingdoms of Bijapur and the kingdom of Golconda have been defeated, exterminated, the kings captured, killed, put in prisons. And that left only the Marathas under Chhatrapati Sambhaji. To his good luck in 1689 and an energetic Mughal officer at that time, he could capture Chhatrapati Sambhaji when he was at Sangameshwar in the Konkan region. And he was brought to the camp where Aurangzeb stayed and very cruelly put to death after a torture which extended for almost 1.5 months. And obviously in 1689, if you were in place of Aurangzeb, you would say that my life's ambition has been achieved. Entire India is under me now, because his kingdom extended till the Kaveri, right from Kabul. And all the people who challenged him at that time were completely under his sway. And he felt that I've done my job. And that is where that spark of the death of the king actually fired the Maratha resistance, which continued, and it became very difficult for Aurangzeb to control him. His generals kept telling him, let's go back, our job is done. Well, he would not refuse. And an old man of 80, 90 years of age kept going from one fort to the other, taking that fort, back is turned, the fort was taken back by the Marathas. This whole cycle went on and on and on for a long time. It was only in 1705 that he realized, because by the time Sambhaji was dead, his son Shahu had been taken prisoner when Raigad was captured. He had been taken in the Mughal camp. He was accompanying Aurangzeb wherever he went. His other son Rajaram had bottled, he was kind of in Jinji in the south, that which became the capital of the Marathas at that time. And for 8 long years, there was a siege around the fort of Jinji. And at the end of 8 years, there was a treaty by which the Zulfikar Khan, who was the Mughal general, allowed Rajaram to escape and return to Maharashtra and took over Jinji from them. And that completed the Mughal conquest of the south. So this happened in 1705, when Aurangzeb returns to Ahmednagar, he realizes that the treasury is empty, the battle is not won, the enemies are growing stronger and stronger, the momentum is against him. And when he dies in 1707, he knows that a fratricidal war will break out amongst his sons. So he tries to separate them. He puts one in Kabul, he puts one with him in Ahmednagar, third one he sends off to Bijapur, so they don't fight with each other. But on his death, the inevitable again happens, the three of them have a war. And to sow divisions among the Marathas, Shahu, who is a prisoner for 18 long years in the Mughal camp, is released and sent back to the Marathas to divide them. And that division persists to this day when you have the two kingdoms of Satara and Kolhapur in Maharashtra, which are the two branches of the family. So all these things happened in those years, in the second phase, as I call it, from 1680, the death of Chhatrapati Shivaji, to 1707, the death of Aurangzeb. And 1707 is a watershed in our history, because after that the Mughals collapsed so rapidly that in 12 years' time, as you will see, 30,000 Marathas were in Delhi. So when 1707, you find Chhatrapati Shahu coming down to the Deccan, winning the battle with Tarabai, who was his aunt, and being crowned at Satara. And 18 long years in a Mughal prison obviously doesn't train you for war, doesn't train you for administration. And he collected a group of people around him who were talented, who knew the administration, who knew the art of war. And that is where you find that though the first 6 years were very turbulent, not everybody accepted that Shah would be the next king. So there were rebellions. The Senapati's son, Chandrasen Jadhav, rebelled against him. He first went to Tarabai, then went and joined the Nizam later on. Kanoji Angre, the general of the admiral of the Maratha fleet, he was on Tarabai's side. So all these difficulties were there, and one person, even Bajirao Peshwa, who was a Peshwa of Shah, was imprisoned and taken away by Kanoji Angre. That is when he appoints Balaji Vishwanath as the Peshwa in 1713. And Balaji Vishwanath goes forth, meets Kanoji Angre, has a treaty with him in 1713, and that set the system by which a confederate system was established, that multiple regions were given to multiple chiefs, and they accepted that the sovereign will be Chhatrapati Shahu. So the first of them was Kanoji Angre, and in later years you will find the Holkars, the Scindias, the Bhosles of Nagpur, the Gaikwads of Gujarat. They all looked after their regions, owing allegiance to the Chhatrapati at Satara. In 1720, when Balaji Vishwanath died, he must have been 60 years old at that time, his young son Bajirao became the Peshwa. And Bajirao was then not yet 20, he was about 19 years of age at that time. And many people criticized Shahu for appointing him, that he's an immature young boy and keeps going around here and there. So he said, his father has done so much for me, I'll appoint him right now. If he doesn't perform, I can get rid of him as the Peshwa. So he was appointed. And those 20 years from 1720 to 1740 can be properly called as the era of Bajirao, because he was the most important person in the Indian landscape at that time. On the one hand, the Mughals were collapsing. In 1719, when Balaji Vishwanath went to Delhi, he got the sanads of Swaraj Chauthai Sar Deshmukh from the Mughal emperor. He got Shahu's mother released from prison after 30 long years with the Mughals. So all these things happened in the last year of his life. And Bajirao, first few years, he was moving around all over the place, learning what is a territory like, what is a terrain like, who are the people who are ruling over different regions. And the first real battle that he fought was against the Nizam. The Nizam had come down from Delhi with the aim to establish his own kingdom in the south at Aurangabad, Burhanpur, Hyderabad and so on. So when the Nizam came down here, he wanted help, and he first sought the help of the Marathas, and later on he felt that I will drive a wedge between the two houses of Satara, Kolhapur, take them under me and begin to rule the Deccan all over by myself. So when Shahu realized that, he summoned Bajirao, who was somewhere near Srirangapatnam at that time, called him back to Satara and said that this Nizam is marching towards Satara, he will capture us and take us down there. So please come here as soon as you can. And that led to the famous battle of campaign of Palkhed. The Palkhed campaign was an 8-month-long campaign, which is a running battle between the Nizam and Bajirao. And in fact, that entire campaign has been labelled by no less a person than Field Marshal Montgomery as a masterpiece in strategic mobility. That is the first time the cavalry was put to such good use that when Nizam, who was an undefeated general of the Mughals and from the time of Aurangzeb, was defeated at Palkhed, within 3 days he submitted, accepted terms, said he will not create any trouble anymore, and accepted the rule of Shahu. He said, I will collect your Chauthai for you and so on. So that went on, and you find that later on, 1729-30, the Marathas spread to Malwa, they spread to Bundelkhand, and in the Konkan, they fought with the Siddhi of Janjira, who was again part of the Mughal navy, one can say. And the Portuguese, from whom they took the areas north of Bombay, the entire region north of Bombay from Daman to Bandra was under the Portuguese. So they liberated that in 1739. And in 1737, Bajirao actually went to Delhi, because he had asked the Mughal Emperor Muhammad Shah at that time that you please cede this province of Malwa to me, which he kept pretending he will do, but he didn't do it. So finally in 1737 he said, I will show myself on the doorstep of Delhi. And he marched 8 miles away from a 1 lakh strong Mughal army south of Delhi, went to Delhi, stayed at Talkatora, which is Talkatora today. And the Mughals were flabbergasted to see that this man has reached here with 100,000 soldiers south of the capital. So there's a story which I'll just relate in a minute, that when the news came to Muhammad Shah's court that Bajirao is here, so you find that they send a beggar, the man disguised as a beggar, to the Maratha camp to find out, has Bajirao really come here? And that around midnight, that beggar comes back from the Maratha camp and he shows the arms he has got to the Maratha camp, which is some dry bhakri, dry roti, and some grain, a gram. Because the gram, chana, and bhakri was a staple diet of a Maratha rider. And when they saw this food, which he got as arms, they realized that the Marathas had reached Delhi. There was a small battle there. Few people came out, they defeated them, but he didn't stay on for too long. His purpose was to show Muhammad Shah that Delhi is not out of reach. And actually it was the first time an enemy had come to the doorsteps of Delhi after 180 long years. Second battle of Panipat, when Akbar came with his army and defeated the Afghans who were ruling Delhi at that time, and 1737, no other invader had reached Delhi in these 180 years. But seeing that the Marathas can reach Delhi, a person who got ideas about that was Nadir Shah sitting in Iran. And so 2 years later, you find Nadir Shah coming to Delhi. And at that time, the Marathas were occupied in the massive battle with the Portuguese on the western coast. So Bajirao went to Burhanpur, where he was waiting for that battle to get over. So his brother and all the army will join him. And he will go to Delhi to evict Nadir Shah from there. And in fact, there are several letters where they say that what should we do when we defeat Nadir Shah? Who will be the king of Delhi? And then there was a proposal that though Bajirao will defeat him, the king appointed there will be the king of Udaipur. So all these letters at that time were going on, and they were all waiting for Bajirao. But before Bajirao could go, actually the date is very significant. On 4th of May, 1739, you find the Portuguese surrendered, and on the 5th of May, 1739, Nadir Shah makes his way back to Iran. Probably the Indian summer was too much for him, but by that time he had completely looted the treasury of the Mughals accumulated over the previous 180 years. So this was also a side. Then after that, the Mughals were even weaker than what they were before that. Now, if you see this genealogy chart of the Peshwa, I think it's a good time to introduce Raghoba, who he was. So surprisingly, Raghoba was the son of Bajirao. And the second son, he had four sons, these two sons survived. One was Nana Sahib, who became the Peshwa after 1740, and second was Raghunathrao. And there was almost 11 or 12 years difference between these two. So when Bajirao died, Raghunathrao was practically 5 or 6 years old. And for all practical purposes, the elder brother was his guardian, Nana Sahib Peshwa. So the entire period of 1740s was when Nana Sahib tutored him, brought him up to, along with a cousin of his called Sadashirao Bhau. So Sadashirao Bhau was called Sadoba and Raghunathrao was called Raghoba. So these were the two words they were known by. And from here we go ahead to the fourth phase from 1740 to 1761. I feel this is the crucial phase in Indian history because it was a turning point of Indian history. If you find that is when you find that people like Ahmad Shah Abdali, Robert Clive, Dupleix, these people, Najib ud-Dawla from the Rohilkhand, these people became active in Indian politics. And it was actually here in the Carnatic where the first Anglo-French rivalry began, that the French defeated the first Indian army. 300 French men with their rapidly reloading guns, defeated a 30,000 strong army of the Nawab of Arcot. And that is when Dupleix got this idea that I can actually capture most of India because I've got superior arms compared to the native armies. And he did for a considerable period, almost till the mid-1750s. You find the Dupleix actually running the government of the Nizam. The Nizam is just a puppet. His General Bussy is the man who's responsible for the Nizam's armies. And it was only the English who learned from the French that this can be done. And of course, the intrepid nature of Robert Clive, who came after Dupleix, but he captured Arcot, he withstood the siege of Trichinopalli at that time. And that is when, around 1756, you find the Nawab of Bengal dies. And his son, the 17-year-old Siraj ud-Dawla, refuses to accept the British and tells them, you remove your fortifications at Fort William, and captures Calcutta and drives them out. The black hole of Calcutta is supposed to have taken place at that time. So Clive is sent with a flotilla of ships, which were actually the Royal Navy, not as you usually hear that it was the East India Company which did all these things. A Royal Navy, top of the line ships had come here at that time, were headed by a Rear Admiral, one Rear Admiral Pocock, and there's a Vice Admiral Watson, who were leading those ships, and they went and took back Calcutta. And after that, Siraj ud-Dawla took a stand at Plassey. He was defeated in 1757. Now, what were the Marathas doing in 1757? The Marathas were busy with Ahmad Shah Abdali because Nadir Shah's successor became Abdali. He established the country of Afghanistan, and the first place where he went was India because Punjab and beyond were the places where the arid region of Afghanistan could really get their resources from. So he kept invading 1747, 1748, 1752. These invasions continued. And at some point in time, the Mughal emperor, who was just a puppet by that time, they sought help from the Marathas that please help me and protect me from my internal and external enemies. His own wazir was his enemy practically. So in 1752, the Marathas, in exchange for some provinces which they got from the Mughals, signed an agreement that we will protect you. In spite of that, with a 5,000 strong Maratha force in Delhi, you find Abdali enters Delhi in 1757 as a huge army, loots the whole city. One chronicler has written that he looted so much that there even a washerman's donkey was not left behind the city to take his goods back to Afghanistan. That's the extent to which all the animals were commissioned to carry the loot back. So that kind of loot, he went again on a holy jihad, he captured, he massacred the pilgrims at Mathura, Vrindavan. A lot of chroniclers have written things about that. So while Plasi was happening, Abdali was in Delhi and Mathura. And naturally, the Marathas, who always had an inclination towards capturing Delhi rather than other parts of the country, decided that this is the enemy that they will tackle first. So immediately Abdali went back to Afghanistan. You find the Marathas taking over Delhi. Raghunathrao actually led that battle. Raghoba actually led the entire army at that time. And from there, they were invited into the Punjab. They went into Punjab, they captured Sirhind, they went into Lahore, captured Lahore, they sent armies out, captured Multan, they captured Attock, which is on the river Indus, and they went beyond and captured Peshawar. And this was the furthest extent in the northwest of the Maratha reign. And Raghunathrao, Raghoba, who was in Lahore, there is a document which says that he was feted in the Shalimar Bagh of Lahore and rose water was showered on him. And people are very grateful that they had been liberated. The Sikhs were with them. And Raghoba writes a letter to the Peshwa that the Shah of Iran has sent a proposal to me that let's both of us combine and crush Abdali between our two armies. And then we'll split Afghanistan. I will take Kandahar and you take Kabul. So Raghunathrao writes to his uncle, writes to his brother, that but why should we give Kandahar to the Shah of Iran? It once belonged to the Mughals till the time of Alamgir Badshah. So we should not give away Kandahar. I would say that we should also take Kandahar. Of course, they did not cross the Hindu Kush mountains and the Khyber. Raghunathrao was recalled, others were sent in his place. But it was a token presence. You know, the area was so far away from their base in Pune, 1500 kilometers away, that to maintain the supply lines, to maintain a sustainable presence of the army was very difficult. And when Abdali came back in 1759, end of 1759, these small armies of say 2,000 here, 5,000 there, they were just swept aside by the 60,000 strong army that Abdali brought with him. And that is what, again he captured Delhi. And in the south at that time, the famous victory had been won over the Nizam by Bajirao Peshwa, who was Raghoba's cousin, though older than him. And Raghoba came back from Attock and Peshawar with a big debt of 80 lakh rupees. So that debt was something which he was scolded for by Bajirao Peshwa. So he said, why don't you go and try your luck? Go next time. So Bajirao Peshwa was sent north for the first time in his life. And he was sent with a giant artillery of Ibrahim Khan Gardi. And that eventually led to the next stage of our, which was the third battle of Panipat. So after Attock in 1758-59, 18 to 19 months was the Maratha presence there. And of course, why Panipat? Why did the Marathas go there? It was ultimately the last invasion from the northwest, which harked back from 2000 years, that this invasion actually stopped with this battle. After that, you find invaders not reaching Delhi. One reason was this battle of Panipat. Second reason is that the Sikhs had become very strong in Punjab. So they could not really reach Delhi after that. So these two protagonists you find fighting a pitched battle in Panipat, and Marathas came within an inch of winning it, but eventually it was Abdali who, with his superior generalship, superior numbers, it was an entire North Indian coalition who was backing him at that time. There were no friends that the Marathas had in that territory. They had no place to buy food from. So all these things mattered rather than just the battle. And that is why that battle was eventually lost. And that ended a phase of Maratha history where the 3 members of the Peshwa family were killed, 3 members of the Scindia family were killed, and the entire leadership was lost. People at the top. And the Peshwa, Nana Sahib, was very seriously ill. Within 6 months of the battle, he died. His eldest son, who was the heir apparent with the next Peshwa, he was killed at Panipat. And you find that suddenly there's a leadership vacuum. His second son is just 16 years of age. Raghoba is the elder statesman in the family. He is 27 or 28 years of age. And this phase starts in 1761. Immediately, Nana Sahib Peshwa dies. The enemies who are crowding around them start converging towards Pune. So you find the Nizam coming towards Pune. You find Hyder Ali, who had just taken over the power in Mysore, and he coming northwards, crossing the Tungabhadra. There's a letter saying that Hyder's shadow has fallen on the Krishna. So he had come that far ahead. So these were the immediate challenges. And Madhav Rao, being 16 years of age, Raghoba felt that he should be the man who should actually run the matters of state. And he became the regent at that time. But Madhav Rao himself had his own self-respect. He wanted to assert himself as a Peshwa. His mother was even more assertive, who told his son that you can't let your uncle run the matters of state when you are the real Peshwa. So for 2 years, this tussle between uncle and nephew continued until there's a battle with the Nizam at Rakshas Bhuvan, which is just on the southern bank of the Godavari, where the Nizam was signally defeated out through the efforts of Madhav Rao. And from then on, Madhav Rao comes into his own. This vacuum, when the Marathas withdrew after Panipat in the north, was where the English rushed in. So from Bengal, which they took after the Battle of Plassey, you find them rushing eastwards to Bihar, attacking. Shujauddaulah tried to stop them. He was defeated at the Battle of Buxar in 1764. In 1765, he signed off the Diwani of Bihar, Bengal to the English. And that is what actually helped establish an English presence in the Indian subcontinent. So you find several instances happening that time which went against them. Raghoba continued his method of becoming the Peshwa by opposing his nephew. Finally, in 1768, there was an open battle between the two of them, and that battle actually led to the imprisonment of Raghoba in 1768. And he was brought to the Shaniwar Wada in Pune, in the palace, imprisoned there, and he remained in prison for the next 3 years. With his wife and so on. Around that time, Madhav Rao had already done 3 invasions in the Carnatic region, defeated Hyder Ali each time, taken tributes from him. The 4th invasion was done by his relative, Trimbak Pethe. And just north of Srirangapatnam, today there's a town called Melukote, on the top of the hill. So Melukote and the lake down there, in Marathi records it's called Moti Talao, and in local Kannada records it's called as Thunur Lake. So around that place, there was a massive battle which took place. Hyder Ali and his son Tipu, who was that time, say, 20 years of age, they were both defeated. And it is described in several letters that they had to run away from the battlefield disguised as beggars. And there was another man captured by the Marathas thinking he's Hyder Ali. Because those days, pictures of the rulers were not easily available and people could masquerade as somebody else. In fact, when Chhatrapati Shivaji escaped from Agra, he had a man who was lying on the bed as if it is Shivaji, showing his ring that he's still lying there. So these kind of things happened so that the main person was protected. And obviously, after that, Hyder Ali was quiet as long as Madhav Rao was around. And in 1772, with Madhav Rao on his deathbed, he released Raghoba, called him to his side and told him, my younger brother, Narayan Rao, who was that time 16, 17 years of age, he is going to be the next Peshwa. Again, it was a blow to Raghoba's own ambitions of becoming the Peshwa. And I would request you to please look after him. And on oath, Raghoba agreed that he will look after him, along with a few senior ministers. So that is the story as we come to 18 November 1772 when Madhav Rao died. And it has been historically shown that that is the period when the main Peshwai, the main 4 Peshwas, Balaji Vishwanath, Bajirao, Nana Sahib and Madhav Rao, this is called the main Peshwai. There's a book by Richard Temple, who was an administrator in India in the 19th century, where he says that in no instance of Indian history do you find 4 Indian rulers, one after the other, as great as these 4 Peshwas. The only other example you find is among the Mughals, from Akbar to Aurangzeb. 4 in a row, you find people who are efficient, who look after their kingdom, expand their kingdom, and so on. So that is the importance of this Peshwa period of 1713 to 1772. After that, the period after that was also continued by the Peshwas, but that's called the Uttar Peshwai, or the post-Peshwa period, because the Peshwa himself was never in control. When the Chhatrapati died in 1750, he had no son. Power devolved on the Prime Minister, Peshwa. In 1772, with the death of Madhav Rao, and as we shall see, the assassination of Narayan Peshwa, from the Prime Minister it devolved to ministers and generals. And obviously a central strong authority was missing. So that did not quite go well in the years to come. So now we come to the 9 months of Narayan Rao from November onwards. So as a later poet said that it is from here, he says in Marathi, Ithuni suru dhala adbhut pralayala. So it was a pralay, or the end of the world, which happened, and it began from here. He spoke of a later period. But actually, if you look back, this is when the thing started. So the book actually describes how the plot as it evolved. There are stages it kept building. First it was a small plot, different people, new people come in, different people come in. So it kind of evolves. So you know who are the initial conspirators, who joined, why did they join, what are their motivations, what did Raghoba do? He was still in prison, Narayana had put him back in prison. His wife Anandi Bai, what were her motivations, what were her actions, what did she do actually? And she's often blamed for the entire episode. So how did the assassination occur? There are several original sources, several original stories which we have. One is the Patwardhan letters, which are published, about 8 to 9,000 letters published in the Patwardhan Daftar. The Patwardhan Daftar Bakhar, which is the Harivanshachi Bakhar, the Peshwa Daftar, the Nagpurkar Bhosle Bakhar, a Hakikat by a person who was actually with Raghoba for a good number of years. He's written a Hakikat. And then again there is an unpublished Bakhar I found purely devoted to Narayana Rao's assassination, which was in the Royal Asiatic Society of London. So I found it in about 2013 and I was saving it for this book. So here I put it in the appendix with English translation. And there are several other things like the Gramanya affair. The Brahmins of the time wanted a monopoly on the way things are run, and they wanted to get rid of the Prabhus, who were the competing caste. So they established, they declared that they are no longer Kshatriyas. By not putting them as Kshatriyas, they suddenly fell to the bottom of the social scale, which was not acceptable to them. A whole lot of ministers, a whole lot of military leaders were Prabhus. So that added to the move towards Narayana Rao's assassination. Then there's a map of the Shanivara Vada, which I printed in the book, which was an original map of 1796 when the Peshwas were still ruling. And it shows where, what was, whose house was where and so on. It also gives you an idea of what was the route that Narayana Rao followed when the Gardis were chasing him to kill him, which again comes from there. So all these things are there, but I can just show one version of it, a cinematic version of it, which was filmed around 1935. And it shows you the tumult in the Peshwa's own palace when the Gardis are chasing Narayana Rao and he's rushing towards his uncle's apartment to ask him to save him. And though it is in Marathi, you can identify Narayana Rao, you can identify Raghoba, his wife Anandi Bai, the Gardis who are chasing him, Sumair Singh and Muhammad Isaf, Tulaji Pawar and so on. So, can I have the lights a little dim or it's okay? So Anandi Bai has given a letter to Sumair Singh and said that she will cut down to pieces. This is Anandi Bai in the movie. This is Raghoba. The first instinct of Raghoba is to protect his nephew. He doesn't want to kill him. So you see, in popular imagination, it was always the Anandi Bai who was blamed for the assassination. And Raghoba was an indecisive person in his life. He was influenced by shagirds, influenced by his wife, and that way he was not of a person of firm convictions who would stand by what he felt. There are many instances in his life when he behaved in this manner, indecisively sort of. And the aftermath of this was that the central authority, as you can see this picture is the old crayon drawing which I've kind of modified for this. In the end, this was the only political assassination in Maratha history. And the Marathas' conquest, their nature was not one to erect, piles of skull before their tents after a battle. You never hear such instances in there, or slaughter of the innocents, or massacre of somebody. You don't. So the conquest, in spite of stray incidents which have been pulled out of history to blame them as marauders and so on, it is a mild conquest of India compared to what happened in other regimes. And the aftermath was that the central authority of the Maratha power was further weakened, and the enemies of the state grew bold. So you find the English grabbed the island of Salsette, which is what Bandra to Borivali, that's the island of Salsette. So that was with the Marathas, they grabbed it from there at that time. The Nizam helped the Marathas to fight against Raghoba. But in exchange, he asked them that since Aurangabad is with me, why don't you give me the fort of Daulatabad, which is just next door? And they could not refuse because he was helping them against Raghoba. If they would not have, it was quite likely the Nizam would have gone on Raghoba's side. So this was the kind of interplay at that time which further weakened them. And a kind of decline you find begins with this particular event. And of course, the dramatic personae at that time, you find Ram Shastri, the Chief Justice of the time, who found the evidence that Raghoba was involved in capturing Narayan Rao or killing him. He goes to the court and tells him that I have come here as a ashauch, just my dhoti on. I'm not going to do namaskar because in ashauch period you don't do namaskar. So he says, I'm leaving this job and going. So the people in the court ask him, but what is the penance for this crime which has been committed? So he says, penance, you can either sit in a hut of dry grass and burn the grass. If you survive from that, you can take hot boiling lead and drink it. If you further survive from that, you will get the death penalty. So that is the answer which Ram Shastri is said to have given to the court at that. And then he walks off from there, leaving his job and goes back to his village. Nana Fadnis, of course, who was the moral authority behind his entire move against Raghoba, was the evidence was found that he was implicated in that. And it was very easy for the Marathas at that time. Had they said, okay, let Raghoba continue ruling. The entire civil war which took place and which was taken advantage of by the other powers. But there was a strong moral feeling that this is something wrong has been done. The Chhatrapati at that time, Ram Raja, he writes a letter saying, this is the kingdom of Dharma. You cannot have such acts performed in this kingdom and this man must be punished. So these people came forth to kind of oppose him, and that is what led to the Maratha civil war, and which later on led to because the English had grabbed Salsette, so that led to the first Anglo-Maratha war. And this last picture is that of Narayan Rao, the poor unfortunate chap, and his son, born posthumously, was to become the Peshwa at the age of 40 days in 1775. Now, tragically, you find all these events happening exactly 100 years after Chhatrapati Shivaji's coronation. So that is the time it takes for a kingdom born on nationalistic fervor to decline and lose their sense of nationalistic values. So this is a picture which shows how the empire grew and how it fell. On the left, you find the various Chhatrapatis in the years when the expansion took place. On the right, you find during the Peshwa, Balaji Vishwanath, Bajirao, Bajirao, Madhav Rao, and the last Peshwa, Bajirao II, how the empire expanded. And you can see that these are dotted lines which show that at some point in time, there was a area here which was taken by you find this dotted line here is where the Punjab and these areas, for some time, the taxes were collected by them. This area of the dashed line, as they say here, limit of additional area under some form of Maratha rule within the Maratha Confederacy. Like Orissa was under the Bhosles of Nagpur, and they kept demanding the English that they should pay them south. And the Malwa and Bundelkhand, these were again partly with the Peshwa, the Scindias and the Holkars. This was the original Swaraj of Chhatrapati Shivaji, which you find here. Bangalore was also there, Vellore is there, down below Jinji, Tanjavur are also there. and there's a place near Koppal, which was again a part of Chhatrapati Shivaji's Swarajya. So this is showing the graph of how it grew and how it fell in the years to come. I'll just have a final word on what other people said about the Marathas, and this is predominantly by English. And one of the things they say on the left here, in 1778, this was stated in 1778, that when the armies carry destruction and death into the territories of the Mohammedans, all is quiet. Quite happy and regular at home. No robbery is to be dreaded. No imposition or obstruction from the officers of government. No protection necessary but the shade. To be a stranger is sufficient security. There is no ideal picture of happiness. This is about the Maratha regions he is talking about. The author of the dissertation, who travelled lately into the country of the Marathas, avers from experience the truth of this observation. But the Marathas, who have been represented as barbarians, are a great and rising people subject to a regular government, the principle of which are founded on virtue. Now, this Marathas who lost their kingdom, and you find in the 19th century, the entire freedom struggle is dotted with revolutionaries and people fighting for the independence of India. So, in 1899, when the Rand, who was the commissioner in Pune, was assassinated by the Safikars, one author has tried to find an explanation for this. So he says that you must not forget that it was from the Marathas and the Sikhs that we actually conquered India. And at the beginning of the 18th century, the Mughal Empire began to fall to pieces. The Marathas and Sikhs were the Hindu reaction. Spreading from Western India, the Marathas overran the whole peninsula from Punjab to Bengal. They made the Emperor of Delhi their prisoner and governed and raided in his name. Maratha chiefs founded the dynasties of Sindhya, Holkar and Baroda, but the head of their confederacy was always the Peshwa at Pune. Second paragraph, he says, why the Maratha feeling against the British was so strong? Other provinces of India were ceded to us or conquered from alien lords. Because other provinces, it was a change of masters. If they were ruled by the Mughals, they handed over to Marathas. Their status did not change. Were ceded to us or conquered from alien lords, the Marathas lost their all in war. So later did the Sikhs. But while the Sikhs have long since reconciled themselves to our dominion, the Marathas have never forgotten how high they were less than 100 years ago. This is written in 1899. And who it was that brought them low. They lost more than others, and they feel the loss more. For others, we were a change of masters. Them we brought down from masters to slave. And in the end, he concludes by saying his empire, his nationality, his religion, his honor, his beautiful language. We have taken away his all. So that is the summing up statement, I would say, of the Maratha period. And I hope I have adhered to the time which has been allotted to me. So thank you very much for a patient hearing, and I would welcome any questions if you have any. So mic, one second. Is there a mic somewhere? Should I speak here? Okay, fine. Yeah, please go ahead.
When Delhi was under the rule of Marathas for quite a considerable period of time, why were other people asked to rule over that and not the Peshwas or the?
This is an oft-repeated question, actually. Basically, Chhatrapati Shahu, in 18 long years in Mughal prison, had become very grateful to Aurangzeb for sparing his life and not forcing him to change his faith. And it is said that he promised the dying emperor that he will always help the Mughal government when in difficulty. And this is a promise. So 1750 he died. Till then, he ensured that the Mughal emperor was not disturbed by any of his armies. Even the Nizam, though he was defeated several times, he made sure that the Nizam's army was not rule was not completely extinguished. So he was particular about that. That is the first thing. Secondly, the Maratha base was in the Deccan. To go to Delhi, supplant the emperor and put somebody else. Now, who will that person be? First thing is the Chhatrapati was not willing to go there in Shahu's time. And later on, the office of the Chhatrapati became so weak that it could not go there. The Peshwa couldn't go because after all, he was the prime minister of the Chhatrapati, so he could not go there. The third thing was a more practical reason. They didn't have the strength to be in Delhi. The strength was in the Deccan around Pune. So they preferred the policy of let the Mughals reign and the Marathas will rule. So it was a titular emperor, and the British followed the same system when they took over Delhi in 1803. And Shah Alam II continued to stay in the Red Fort. His son Akbar Shah stayed there, Bahadur Shah Zafar stayed there, until finally in 1857 they got rid of the subterfuge, I would say, that there's a Mughal empire still thriving. Practically speaking, Mughal empire was finished when Nadir Shah came here. Even before that, from 1720, Muhammad Shah Rangila, he was called Rangila because he was Rangila. He didn't look after the kingdom. So 1720, actually, the Mughal empire was already over by that time. Yes, Dr. Bide.
Thank you for the marvelous presentation. Two questions. The Peshwas, unlike any other facet of history that I'm aware of, were hereditary prime ministers. How did this come about at all? Because there is no other history of a prime ministership going in a hereditary fashion.
The kings were hereditary, and it was Shahu's desire when Balaji Vishwanath, even the Moropant Pingle, who was the prime minister of Shivaji, his son Bhairopant Pingle became the Peshwa in Shahu's time. Again, that was hereditary. It was only when Bhairopant Pingle was captured and taken away that they found a new person to take his place. And because the first Peshwa did so much for Shahu, in fact, in one of his letters he refers to him as Atul Parakrami Sevak, who's done so much for me, that he felt it was his duty to hand over the next post, of Peshwa's post, to Bajirao. And then Bajirao excelled in that role in 20 years that he was there. I mean, the borders of the Ream have reached the Yamuna, one letter says. From 4 or 5 districts around Pune, you find that the empire stretches up to Bundelkhand and touches the river Yamuna. So there was no reason after that to change that system. Nana Sahib again, when he took over, he was living with Shahu in Satara for a fairly long time as a representative of Bajirao, because Bajirao was moving around all over the place. So Nana Sahib, Shahu had a certain affinity for, because he was fond of him. So though he was 19 years old, after Bajirao's sudden death, he again appointed Nana Sahib, but he was very feudal in this respect that it was a hereditary principle which must continue. And that prevailed not only in the Peshwas, it prevailed in all the Sardars of the Deccan, whether it is the Gaikwads, the Bhosles, the Scindias, the Holkars. And later on what happened is the subsequent generations began to have feuds amongst themselves. So who will be the next chief? Like in this book, the Bhoslas of Nagpur, they are fighting with each other throughout the book. Because the two brothers, they are both fighting to become the chief of Varad. So that continued. The Gaikwads, it was happening again in this book. So with the death of Damaji Gaikwad in the 1760s, the feud in Gaikwad started. In Nagpur, it started in 1756 when Raghuji Bhosle died. When Mallara Holkar died, his son was already predeceased him, and his grandson died a year later. So a cousin took over, and Ahilya Bai, there were two dual centers. Ahilya Devi looked after the administrative and the finances, while Tukoji Holkar held the military command. So that went on, but after Tukoji's death, again there was a dispute of who will be and the Scindias tried to control him. After the death of 3 Scindias in Panipat, you find there's a dispute between 3 Scindias, whether Mahaji will become the chief, whether Kedarji will become the chief, or whether Manaji will become the chief. And they all had their supporters in the Peshwa family. Raghunathrao propped up one person, another person propped up somebody else. So this disease, I would say, spread to all the families who will take over from his father's patrimony, kind of thing. So that feudal system which we had at that time, and I'm sure it is still there. You just have to look at our political leaders. So I think that it is ingrained in our DNA. And when we came across a power which appointed people on merit, that is when the deficiencies of the system actually came out.
The other question is, early in your presentation you mentioned that Shivaji abandoned Persian-sounding titles. The term Peshwa itself was replaced by...
Yes, but that
how did
in common usage it continued. But all letters, he's not mentioned as Peshwa anywhere. The English refer to him as a Peshwa, but in all Marathi letters, he's called Balaji, Bajirao, Peshwa, Pradhan Pandit. And like Chimaji Appa was the Pandit, Bajirao was Pradhan, Pandit Pradhan. So these titles are used in all the letters. Official titles were Pandit Pradhan. but the English in their books kept referring to him as the Peshwa. And the today Peshwa family has continued with the surname of Peshwa.
Namaskar, Doctor.
Hello.
Thank you, first of all, for your fantastic work and articulating Maratha history into English. So it is helping non-Marathi people to get the facts. My question is regarding Anandibai's blame, and I'll switch to Marathi because that is धरावे and मारावे. तर जनरली आताच्या काळामध्ये जेव्हा आपण धरावे आणि मारावे जेव्हा देवनागरी लिपीमध्ये बघतो, तर ध आणि मा कदाचित थोडाफार साधर्म्य होऊ शकतो. पण तेव्हा मोडी लिपी अस्तित्वात होती, इफ आय एम नॉट रॉंग. आणि मोडी लिपीमध्ये ध आणि मा हे साधर्म्य नसलेले दोन अक्षर आहेत. तर मोडी लिपीमध्ये ध आणि मा,
आता the original letter is no longer in existence.
Okay.
First thing. Secondly, we don't know if it was just crossed and put a ma on top. We don't know that, or it was overwritten.
Okay.
We have no way of finding out that part. So many letters you find that overwriting is done, something is scratched out, put on the top. So you find that kind of thing. So we don't have the original letter with us today, but we know that such a letter existed because there are three pieces of evidence to support that such a letter existed. One was Ram Shastri, who found that letter, and because of that he declared the punishment for Raghoba. Second evidence is that Grand Duff refers to that letter because he has seen a lot of documents when he was resident at Satara. And the third evidence is Anandibai herself. In 1784, when she was in imprisonment in Kopargaon, she writes to Nana Fadnis ki dhचा मा कुणी केला याची किमर्थम चौकशी नाही केली. Why didn't you inquire who converted the dha to ma instead of capture to kill? Who made that order? She herself asks him. So there was a dhचा ma, 100%. How it was done, we don't know.
I have a question. See this Mysore Maharaj, the army was under Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, but they neglected the king and they became the kings. Why Peshwai did not do the same with Chhatrapatis? They killed Maharaja's son. Oh, okay, by I think he was immersed in water, small child. They did like that.
There are a couple of instances when the Maharaja's family members, princes, were killed in Hyder Ali's time. Now, there's a difference that the Maharaja of Mysore had already been relegated to the sidelines before Hyder Ali came on the scene by his two ministers. So they had already taken charge of the kingdom, and the Maharaja was just in name only.
Naam ke vaste.
Yeah, but when the Mysore generals who were there, they could not face the invasions of the Marathas and the English and the French. They could not face up to them. They found that this Faujdar of Dindigal, as Hyder Ali was at that time, he had prepared an army in the French fashion because he had been involved in the siege of Trichinopalli and he had joined the French and learned the art of war from them, the European fashion of war. So with his drilled regiments from Dindigal, he came to the help of the Mysore kingdom at that time, and he told them that leave it to me, I will push them back.
No, but why the Peshwas did not do the same? They still respected Chhatrapati.
The Chhatrapati, because basically the Shahu Chhatrapati was the man who actually gave them the power of the Peshwa, sustained that power as they continued to give them that this thing at the Peshwa, and after Shahu's death, for a good 4 months, Nanasaheb Peshwa stayed in Satara. Why they did it? It was only out of respect for the royal family. You find even in the Panipat Bakhar, the letter, there are words put in Nanasaheb Peshwa's mouth on his deathbed, where he says that आम्ही 4 पिढ्या भोसल्यांची सेवा केलेली आहे. And त्यांचं हे राखणं हे आपल्याला महत्त्वाचं आहे. We must preserve that because we have been their servants for 4 generations.
That shows their culture. What I felt, it shows their culture.
Yes.
To respect, and they had gratitude.
Yes.
And one more question is, how many years totally Peshwas ruled India? Totally from first
Actually,
to
gradually as Shahu became older, and during Balaji Vishwanath's time, he was very much in charge. In the first 10 years of Bajirao, he was very much in charge.
how many years? 100 years?
No, Peshwas ruled because traditionally the Peshwa starts in 1713 as the prime ministers. And the main Peshwa, as I said, ends in 1772 with the death of Madhav Rao. The period after that was Narayan Rao's 9 months, then his young son, 40 days old, Savai Madhav Rao, who died in 1795, and then second Bajirao, the last Peshwa. This comes under Uttar Peshwa because during this entire period, the Peshwa was in name only. He did not have any power of his own.
How many years?
So 1713 to 1818, you can say, 105 years, out of which the period 1773 onwards was as a notional kind of chief, as a notional prime minister, but really not having
See,
wielding,
it's not a big period then.
not a very
It's not
big
a big period.
not a very
Because
big
when you compare with the Muslim kingdoms, see, everyone lived up to 80 years. Aurangzeb died at the age of 80. Chhatrapati died at the age of 50 due to ileocecal tuberculosis, I am not wrong.
No, I don't know. I mean, he's had a very short illness and died. That's all that we know. Today's medical terms, it's difficult to identify
And
which
even Madhav
illness.
also due to tuberculosis.
Madhav had tuberculosis, Chimaji Appa had tuberculosis, Nana Sahib had tuberculosis.
So the span was more in them, and they ruled for 4 generations, means so many years.
Another difference between the two was that they exterminated their rivals. So if one king comes to power, none of his brothers survive. There's no alternate power center that anybody can go to and prop up that person and replace this brother. So Aurangzeb, when he came to the throne, none of his brothers were alive. Even after he came to the throne, he chased them for the next 3 years, wherever they were, found them and put them to death. Because he could, Akbar, when he came to south to Chhatrapati Sambhaji, you find he chasing him down and catching him. In Farrukh Siar's time, in the 18th century, the Marathas tell him that, oh, we have got a son of Akbar here. It was a mythical story. And we want to hand him over to you. So we are coming to Delhi to hand him over to you. So they had a elephant covered with a howdah and a supposed man sitting there as a prince, which permitted them to go to Delhi. And then Farrukh Siar, the first question he asks, where is the prince? There is no prince. It is just that they came to Delhi with 30,000 people using that as a pretext. So no rival was left. He had to be destroyed, killed. No rival was allowed to come up.
Or is it due to, see, they did not go to the war. Aurangzeb was not actually in the war. He was in his place only and giving orders to his commanders.
No, but Aurangzeb.
See, even Krishna Deva Raya, he ruled for 20 years, only 20 years.
Yes.
All Hindu kings, they ruled only for a short period. Whereas Mughal kings, they ruled for 50 years, 60 years later.
Actually, except for Aurangzeb and Akbar,
Oh.
both of them ruled 50 years each. But Shah Jahan and Jahangir had quite short tenures, 20 years or so. So basically, it was just their way of puritanic lifestyle, daily exercise, whatever it may be. It is a constitutional thing. You can't.
What happened to the what I heard is in Balochistan, there are Marathas still.
Yes. After Panipat, a lot of people stayed back or they migrated with the armies of Marathas. Bukti and Muri, there are 2 tribes in Balochistan, which even today, after their name, they write a surname as Bukti Maratha. Or in Haryana, there are people who still call themselves Road Marathas. So they are still there. It's some people have done some research on that because it has to be a DNA sampling and all these things have to be done to really find out what kind of sharing you have with the Marathas here. But there are people who are still in Baluch who call themselves Maratha.
Still they call their mother as I.
Possible.
Just a small question. Who are the people called Gardi?
Gardi actually is a word which comes from the French garde, Garde. So when Busi was the chief general of the Nizamul Mulk at Hyderabad, his people who were trained in the art of artillery or guns, they were called Garde. And that was converted to Gardi. So all these people who were trained in artillery or in using the muskets and these kind of things, they were called Gardis. And their surname became Gardis. Even today, the descendants of Ibrahim Khan Gardi live in Pune. So they are considered as Gardis, but that comes from the French word as Garde. And they were not Maharashtra people. They were not. They were either from the north or they were even Telangana. You find a lot of people there. There were some Muslims who were there. Marathas believed in being in charge of the cavalry. It was the most glamorous and the most prestigious appointment to be a cavalryman. So this kind of gunnery business they did not do. And they did not try to train that. So even when Nana Sahib found that it's difficult to face the French cannons, he recruited these Gardis into the Maratha army with their guns and their support system as one of the arms of the Maratha army.
So, sir, what was the largest extent of this Maratha Empire? And my second question was, why did Shivaji de-Persianize the titles and the names and seals?
See, there was a feeling that Persia is a foreign country today. Iran, from where we come, the language comes. India has got enough languages of its own. It has got its own identity as a country. And over 300-400 years of rules by people who had come from there, this identity was kind of being submerged. So with that feeling in mind, he began this process of weeding out foreign words. And that is why today you find the Persian language practically disappeared. You have to really make efforts to learn the language. Yes. Even some dialects of Persian are not known by Iranian students. I've asked several of them, can you read this letter? No, this is a different dialect, we don't read this. Yeah, there is always some change in language. Even Marathi, there are a lot of changes. Like I showed in that one of the slides, that from Peshawar, see, at one given time, the whole thing was not there from Trichinapalli to Peshawar. At different times, they had their presence there. There was a core empire which remained for a good period of time, which from, say, Orissa or Bundelkhand or Malwa, or Gujarat, Maharashtra, Nagpur, northern Karnataka, this remained with the Marathas for entire period of the 18th century. But beyond that, like when they came to Srirangapatnam, when they came to Tanjavur, when they came to Trichinapalli, this is a time which happened for a few years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, that kind of thing. When they went to Bengal, there were 2 raids by Nanasaheb Peshwa went to Bengal. On the way, he went to Gaya, he went to Kashi. He even took 22 lakh rupees from the then Nawab of Bengal. So that kind of thing went on. But see, holding the whole country together in Indian history for longer than a decade has never happened. It is not possible to hold such a large country together. The first time probably it happened was when the British from Kabul to Burma, that they had this. But again, within that, a large chunk, the Scindias were allowed to rule in their own state. The Holkars were allowed to rule in their own state. The Gaikwads are allowed to rule in their own state. And the British resident would only advise them. They demilitarized India. Not only did they demilitarize India, but the forts which were built by the Marathas were systematically destroyed by cannon fire, so that they can never be used for fighting against the English.
Sir, thank you for this wonderful presentation. So my question is, why do Marathi people till now love and respect Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and celebrate him, but not in the other parts of the country like the great rulers who ruled there? For example, I come from Jhansi, which is in Uttar Pradesh, and we have Jhansi ki Rani Maharani Lakshmibai, but they don't have that kind of celebration for Maharani Lakshmibai as they have for Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj in Marath.
There is one of the oldest statues of any Maratha ruler you find in Pune is that of Jhansi ki Rani in the center of the city. So I don't think it is true that nobody respects them. But if you look at the entire expanse of 150 years, the influence that Chhatrapati Shivaji had on the course of Indian history and the localized rule that Rani of Jhansi had in Gwalior and Jhansi, there's a difference of scale. And what Chhatrapati Shivaji founded, planted a seed, the sapling grew into a large tree, which is not the case in 1857. So that's why there's a difference. And the beginning is the most important of any work.
My name is Shrinidhi Sabarbande. I'm from Nagpur, Maharashtra. So I have one question regarding the date of birth of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, because there are 2 DOBs of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. The first belongs to 1627 and the another one is 1630. So why there is a conflict in between?
That has been sorted out 100 years ago, that it is 1630. Because see, as you proceed in your research, you keep finding newer documents. So newer documents come up and you find newer references, and then you can. So there was actually a committee to establish the date of birth around say 1930s, and from then onwards you find that books are saying it was 1630. So some earlier accounts say 1627.
Hello, sir. Sir, being the third battle of Panipat being the watershed moment in history, so my question is like, I've read both your works about the year of Bajirao as well as third battle of Panipat, but my question is like, if had Bajirao been alive and if he had led the battle of Panipat, what would have been his strategy? And the thing is, especially the Muslim confederacy in the north part when the Afghan ruler came, especially the alliance of Shuja-ud-Dawla was crucial for the victory of the other party. So what he would have done something different to break this alliance.
Actually, a situation like what happened in 1760 and the Maratha army went north to evict Abdali appeared in 1739 during Bajirao's time. So it was quite possible he would have had to also go and fight with Nadir Shah at that time. Now the method of fighting was different in Bajirao's time from the time it was at Panipat. In Panipat, the Marathas had purposely incorporated a large contingent of artillery. It was not a mobile warfare that Bajirao fought. In 1730s and early 40s, the Maratha artillery was not the main arm of their of the way they did battle. It was a roving battle. So it was like a bee, stings you and goes away before you can hit back. So this warfare, if you see from the 17th century onwards, the importance of forts. 17th century forts were very important because you had to attack the enemy and retreat to a safer place. The power and ability to hold large tracts of land and protect them from an invasion had still not come. So this guerrilla warfare, you're dealing with a much more powerful army. As they became more powerful, they started coming on land and fighting land battles. And after 1750, you find the forts were principally used either to store treasure or to keep prisoners. So the importance of forts receded and battle strategies also changed. Initially, it was the guerrilla warfare, depending on forts. Then it shifted to cavalry-based warfare at Bajirao's time. From there, it moved to an artillery-based warfare. And then again, they reverted to guerrilla warfare for some time before Mahatma Scindia realized that I must have trained infantry battalions in the European style. And these are the ones which actually gave a tough fight to the English in 1803. Shuja-ud-Dawla was now let me go into the realm of religion because Abdali was a Sunni, Shia, and Shuja-ud-Dawla was a Shia. So prima facie there was no reason for them to come together. Shuja's father had been helped by the Marathas when he was a wazir at Delhi. He was defeated by the Rohilas. The very Rohilas who had invited Abdali had defeated Safdarjung, and he was picked up from the battlefield and taken back and helped by. He signed a treaty with the Marathas to come to his help, and then the Marathas came there and defeated the Rohilas. So Safdarjung had a lot to be grateful to the Marathas for resurrecting him. But a few years later, because they had signed an agreement with the emperor said, I don't want Safdarjung, get rid of him. So they got rid of Safdarjung and sent him back to Awadh. And his son, after him it was Shuja-ud-Dawla who became the Nawab. Now Shuja-ud-Dawla was sitting on the fence for a pretty long time. It was Najib-ud-Dawla, who was the Rohilla chief of Najibabad, who went personally to Shuja while Sadashiro Bhau, when he was coming north, he was sending envoys. He came personally to him and he was very close to Shuja's borders at that time, Abdali. Now that proximity of a great power, that if you, either you are with us or you're not, what is it? And Najib-ud-Dawla said that if you are scared of joining Abdali's army, because there was a rivalry between them, and you feel that he will do harm to you, I'm the guarantor of your safety. And if you don't believe me, here's my knife and cut my throat. That's what he tells him. So it was an offer and an appeal, which in the name of religion also, which was difficult for Shuja to publicly kind of not accept. And therefore he accepted it. But throughout the time that he was with Abdali, he kept approaching the Marathas and Sadashiro Bhau that let's come to an agreement. Up to the day before the battle, you find that Shuja is negotiating with his wakils with the Marathas that let's avoid the battle. And even after that, when Vishwas Rao and Sadashiro Bhau's bodies are found, they are cremated with all proper rites, religious rites by Shuja-ud-Dawla's men. So he was there because he had to be there. He practically did not participate in the actual battle. But definitely, had he come to this side, he had the greatest army in the north at that point in time. So had he come on the Maratha side, Abdali would probably not have given battle at all because the balance would have been upset. Jats did not join the Marathas. The Rajputs did not join the Marathas. Not just Shuja-ud-Dawla. Had all these people united, it was difficult for Abdali to escape.
Thank you, sir. It was a very nice talk, and I think you have been standing for quite some time now. So,
No, don't worry about me. I'm not that old. I only look old.
yeah. So, on a lighter note, like in Marathi culture, do you think this is the flashpoint from where the uncle-nephew struggle starts? Because if you have noticed the news currently, it is still going.
This is being recorded. Okay.
No, on a serious note. Like,
Yeah, I'm completely apolitical, so I'm not going to get into this.
No. So I'm just asking, have there been instances before this?
See, this phrase "Kaka Mala Vachwa" is part of Marathi literature today.
Yeah, exactly. And so
it started from Narayan Rao's time.
Okay. And just one other question. I know it's too early to ask, but like, what's next?
As of now, I'm going chronologically, and right now only half of Raghoba's story has been told. So I want to take it till his death, which is in 1783, which will incorporate the first Anglo-Maratha war as well. Very, very too much of work that is going to involve. So I hope I can finish it in one book of a finite size. The aim here was to keep it small. Thank you, everybody. Thanks a lot.